In this module, we're going to be looking at overlapping powers. And perhaps overlapping powers isn't entirely accurate, but I think you'll get what I mean. So to begin, let's look and finish up. Let's look at Article 3 and finish up our three branches. So we'll do this very briefly, and then I want to talk to you about what overlapping powers might mean. So my suggestion to you was for Article 1 to create yourself an outline. My suggestion to you was to create yourself an outline for Article 2, and then also to do that for Article 3. Article 3 is also not as long as Article 1. I have some things highlighted I want to discuss, but then we're going to go back and see what we mean by overlapping power, and I want you to consider a couple of questions and then sort of think hard, philosophize about what's going on here. So Article 3 is starts the same way that the other Section 1s of Article 1 and Article 2 do. The judicial power of the United States shall be vested in one Supreme Court and in such inferior courts as the Congress may from time to time ordain and establish. So we'll come back to that, but just be mindful that we have set up our vesting of authority in each of the three branches at the very beginning of each article. So currently, judges, Article 3 judges, serve for life. The judges, both of the Supreme and inferior courts, shall hold their offices during good behavior, and shall at stated times receive for their services a compensation which shall not be diminished during their continuance in office. So you can never get a pay cut. It'd be unconstitutional unless there was an amendment. So this is different. The president has term limits. That is a 4-year term, I should say. The term is limited. I probably shouldn't have said term limits. That is the case, but that didn't happen until later. So a president serves for 4 years and can be reelected, but can only serve for 4 years without being reelected. And Congress has a limitation, and senators have a limitation. Now, certainly senators have a longer period than United States congresspersons, but they're all limited to a term, and then whether or not those terms are limited is another question altogether, which we will be picking up. It will be something for you to discuss and write a paper about. But for the judges, they serve for life. At least that's the way the Supreme Court has interpreted this stretch of text so far. So think about that. There are only currently 9 Supreme Court justices, although you won't find any number as you're reading through Article 3. It doesn't say how many judges or justices there might be. And you might have a question about this during good behavior language for all inferior courts, but be mindful this refers to Article 3 federal courts. In Texas, for instance, state court judges, the trial court, have terms of 4 years. Certainly they can be reelected, but they are elected as opposed to nominated, appointed, and commissioned, and they have 4-year terms. Now, obviously, we will find out, or you may already know, that if there's a vacancy, the governor of Texas can fill the vacancy, but there's some limitations on that as well. So let's look here at Section 2 and briefly finish this up. The judicial power shall extend to all cases in law and equity, arising under this Constitution, right? Arising under this Constitution, arising under the laws of the United States, arising under treaties made. So the judicial power extends to the Constitution, laws of the United States, and treaties. There's a little bit of nuance here too, or which shall be made under their authority. in any one of these cases. But that's law and equity. That's everything. So Marbury versus Madison, there was a question of whether or not the Supreme Court had the authority to issue mandamus under the Judiciary Act. They said, yes, we do. But, oh, look, the Judiciary Act is unconstitutional. Hence, the answer to no, or the answer of no to question number 3 in Marbury versus Madison. It's not necessarily clear that that's the case, because it says the judicial power shall extend to all cases in law and equity. And writ of mandamus is a remedy in equity. But let's see if there's a different way to interpret that. So the judicial power shall extend to all cases in law and equity arising under these constitutional laws and treaties. Then the judicial power shall extend, here's the 2, to all cases affecting. The judicial power shall extend to all cases of admiralty and maritime jurisdiction. The judicial power shall extend to controversies to which the United States shall be a party. The judicial power shall extend to controversies between 2 or more states. Same thing between a state and citizens of another state, between citizens of different states. We'll see this is diversity jurisdiction. And between citizens of the same state claiming lands under grants of different states, and between a state or the citizens thereof of foreign states, citizens, or subjects. So you need to parse this out and go back and look. So just remember, this is the lead. The judicial power shall extend, and then pick it up here, to all cases, to all cases, to all cases, to controversies, between. All right, so that's where the federal judicial authority extends. And then it's done talking about to where the judicial authority extends. And we start with number 2 here. And it gives some specifications. In all cases affecting ambassadors, in all cases affecting other public ministers and consuls, and those in which a state shall be a party. So Texas is a party. The Supreme Court shall have original jurisdiction. In all the other cases before mentioned, the Supreme Court shall have appellate jurisdiction. But that's the law in fact, with such exceptions and under such regulations as the Congress shall make. The trial of all crimes, except in the cases of impeachment, and you know about that because you've read Article 1, shall be by jury. Such trials will be held in the state where the crimes have occurred, have been committed. And if not, then Congress can say where. Section 3, here's the definition to treason. So this helps inform part of the definition for impeachment in Article 2. Treason is defined. Treason against the United States shall consist only in levying war against them or in adhering to their enemies, giving them aid and comfort. That's it. That's the definition of treason for the purposes of this Constitution. So no person shall be convicted of treason unless you have 2 witnesses testifying, or there's a confession. Like if you confess in open court, it's okay. So could you confess in a deposition? This says you have to confess in open court. And then Congress gets to say what the punishment for treason is. Right, we're going to stop there because that's the end of the article, and we're going to go back. And I'm going to use this, number 3, to look at the overlapping powers. What I want you to be doing is looking at Article 1 and Article 2. Your textbook will help with some of this as well, and looking at the overlapping powers. And it's not going to be an overlap in this sense. That is, Congress can do X and the president can do X. It is more, when I say overlapping, more like this. X needs to be done, and there are certain parts of X that the president must do, and there are certain parts of X that the Congress must do. So overlapping sort of more like helping each other out, but there's defined parameters, and it takes 2, as it were, to tango. So when you're looking at these overlapping powers in Article 1 and Article 2, think about this. I'll give you an example using Article 3. So you're going to be looking at Articles 1 and 2 for the most part when you're looking at your Supreme Court cases. But here's an example. So we need to provide justice. All right? We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice. All right? So we want to do that. It's a broad, overarching aim and goal of the Constitution. So how do we do that? Well, we have judicial power. It's one of the branches. We have separated out the powers, right? The separation of powers is extraordinarily important. And we have the judicial power. And it is vested in one Supreme Court. Here's some overlap. Well, except for Congress can establish inferior courts. So the Supreme Court is not the court that establishes the inferior courts. Congress is. So in this sense, Congress and the judiciary, so it would be Congress and the Supreme Court, have overlapping powers here. The actual power is vested in the Supreme Court, but it can also be vested in inferior courts if Congress so ordains and establishes them, which it has done. There's certainly federal courts. For instance, we're in Houston, and there is a federal courthouse not far from the state courthouses. I have been to both. I have been to the federal district court of original jurisdiction. I've been to both criminal and civil trial courts and have participated in criminal and civil appeals in the 1st and the 14th and the 4th Court of Appeals, although the 4th Court of Appeals is not in Houston. It's in San Antonio. And then I have participated in representing clients in the Supreme Court of Texas. So I have never been to the Fifth Circuit or any of the intermediate courts in the federal jurisdiction. I have, I guess the closest is consulted on an appeal. And I have never been to the United States Supreme Court either. So my cases, my practice as an appellate lawyer, it's almost exclusively state court. Occasionally, I have some state claims in the federal court under this diversity jurisdiction. But for the most part, I'm a state law lawyer, right, in the state of Texas. Almost all of my cases are in state court. And if they are not in the state court, they're almost always state law issues that just happen to be in a forum of a federal court because of diversity jurisdiction. There are citizens from Texas and citizens from another state, and so the defendant, if I'm the plaintiff, removes the case from a state court to the federal court, although the substantive state law applies. So when you're thinking about overlapping powers, we have an overlapping power in the very first sentence of Article 3. So think about what you would find. If you have an outline, this might be helpful because you can just look at it. You could even draw lines physically, at least not in your mind. At least in your mind, you can draw these correlations and you can say, here is something that's important that the executive must do, but the executive must participate with Congress. So as an example, which I'm sure you know about because we've talked about it multiple times, is the power of appointment for judges. So the executive, the president, nominates someone for Supreme Court justice, and the Senate gives advice and consent. And if granted, then the president can appoint that person and then commission that person. Once that person is commissioned, then, or I would say at least when appointed, arguably, but once that judge or justice is commissioned and becomes Supreme Court of the United States justice, and that justice gets to serve for life. And the only thing that can bump that judge out is if that judge no longer has good behavior, right? Whatever that looks like. Otherwise, for life. So there's this participatory overlapping connection, at least, between the Congress, specifically the Senate, the executive, and then the judiciary receives this person. But then as soon as that person is a member of the bench on the Supreme Court, it is for life. Although there might be some early arguments, certainly is some case law arguing and discussing it. and some of the opinions about whether or not the president can remove Supreme Court justice to this date, the answer is absolutely not. Supreme Court justice is for life. At least that's how we have interpreted. So think about that, the overlapping powers. And if you came up with not necessarily an outline, but a list of the powers, and you saw how they interrelated with one another, and you had that on a single document, I think it would be extraordinarily helpful. You would be one step further in really understanding how, I'll just call them these things all fit together. So that is something I hope you take to heart and you spend some time on and get your brain sort of wrapped around the overlapping powers. And certainly I don't mean that two branches have the same exact job to do, but these jobs that they do have to do are connected and they require one another.